Ladies and gentlemen, I do believe it is 1775. In fact, it is November. We are in Boston, and King George has basically announced, I've had it. The counties are in rebellion. Does that sound about right?
You said January.
Oh, excuse me, it should be January, because they're getting beginning of the new year. Have I said, and I believe I might have said General Gage, I really don't care about him that much, but General Gage, is that where we are?
Yeah.
Can someone explain what is the problem, the dilemma, the moral crisis faced by Mr. Gage? Ladies and gentlemen, please do not forget, we are about to get to a revolution. General Gage is being told to put down a revolt, but it's not fighting the French, right? He's not killing the Spanish, being told that the citizens of Boston, which are of Massachusetts, which are English, are revolting the king's authority. Ladies and gentlemen, please understand, soldiers are not heartless machines. Soldiers are regular citizens, and he is being told that he must deal with the rebellion. General Gage is given the orders. Technically, they did not arrive in America until April, so you notice there's a gap. And General Gage basically identifies two targets. Some of you are about to realize these are pretty important. Ladies and gentlemen, the two targets are Lexington and Concord. They will be your next events. So for those of you who are following along, Peace of Paris, Pontiac's Rebellion, Proclamation 1763, Sugar Stamp, Declaratory Township T, Coercive, First Continental Congress, and Lexington and Concord. Please be aware, in this chapter, folks, things go in order. They cannot be random. They cannot be mixed up. You cannot go, I'll talk about this now. It will not work. Yes, sir. There are two towns. They are Lexington and Concord. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are not familiar, if you have never studied the American Revolution, this is where the fighting, the bloodshed, the war begins. Ladies and gentlemen, in the town of Lexington, General Gage has identified that there are two horrible, rotten, terrible men. And they are Sam Adams and John Hancock. Allegedly, Adams and Hancock fled Boston, and they are living in Lexington. Ladies and gentlemen, those are the men who are argued, I believe, that is who England is going to blame for masterminding the Boston Tea Party. So Adams and Hancock are supposed to be arrested and brought to trial. Remember the Administration of Justice Act. We can transfer court cases out of the county. That is the two men we are after. The second town I gave you is Concord. Is everybody ready? Concord. There is an armory. The British want the weapons so that the counties cannot use them. Let's be honest, at this time in history, armories were built. In fact, there used to be one here in Elkhorn, right? There's one over on the other side of the fairgrounds. The purpose of an armory is it's a building filled with weapons, so that way if there is a conflict, maybe there's an uprising, a revolt, there would be a place where there's weapons where either citizens or the army could get them to help deal with the conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, that's what we have. So please, you now have a date, April 19, 1775. This is a date. It's a date because something bad is about to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, on April 19th, General Gage is going to send an army to the towns of Lexington and Concord. 700 British soldiers will be sent to basically meet or achieve the two objectives that I just gave you. In the middle of the night, the British leave Boston, and colonists jump on their horses and they ride across the countryside yelling and screaming, the British are coming. Of course, the most famous one is, please be aware, folks, what is the reality? There were several horseback riders. They would go to different towns. They spread across the frontier. Paul Revere is the one, for whatever reason, his name has kind of become synonymous with the warning riders. In fact, what is the interesting story? One of the riders was actually a woman. But the idea was is they were heading off to different towns. The other thing you might want to be aware of is they all came up with a signal. You might have seen this like in National Treasure, where they used lanterns. And people began, as the British would start marching off, if the British were coming by land, you would use one lantern, and if they were coming by sea, you would put two lanterns. It was a way that, of course, the lanterns would sort of show on a greater distance to spread the word so people could then get ahead of where the soldiers were. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the Battle of Lexington. You have two very different perspectives here. One, this is this. Two, this is the English putting down a common revolt, a common rebellion. This would be no different than England dealing with any other squabble that they've dealt with over the last 2,000 years. Please understand, England does not look at this as a war. England looks at this as simply enforcing the law. Lexington. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish that sometimes I had the power to just touch you on the head and, you know, just sort of give you a clear picture. Imagine, it's 5 in the morning. You have this little town of Lexington, and here comes the British Army. They have their red coats on, they're marching down the road, beating their drum, and they're coming to the town. These are formal, professional soldiers. Ladies and gentlemen, in front of the town of Lexington, because of the warning of Paul Revere, there will be 70 Minutemen. And please understand, in Massachusetts, the citizens begin to use the name Minuteman, because at minute's notice, you could leave your home, you would leave your farm to defend or protect your family. So the militia of Lexington, known as Minutemen, came running out. Now think about it. The Minutemen are not really soldiers. They are citizens of Lexington. Kind of think in your head, they're probably dressed very differently. Some of them have jackets on. Some of them have their work clothes. Folks, do you have the picture in your head? You got these 7, I mean, folks, the militiamen, some of them didn't even have rifles. They had pitchforks. You know, they literally came, you know, from their sleep. Some of them were out, you know, milking their cows. And, you know, now all of a sudden they're standing in front of the British Army. The British Army basically sort of stops. They line it up in their rows. The British commander basically tells them, okay, you've done your job. You represented your town, and disperse. I mean, let's be honest. You have 700 versus 70. Folks, what happens next is one of those arguments that no one's ever going to find an answer. And, you know, it's kind of like when we watch movies. Is it matter? Does it matter? And I suppose in theory it does. For our purposes, what matters is there's the next event. What we don't know is who did it. Ladies and gentlemen, April 19th, 1775, somebody shoots. Was it a British soldier? Was it an accident discharge? You know, somebody, you know, literally their gun hit the ground and bam. Some people even argue that some guy was off in the woods hunting his breakfast. A gun goes off, people freak out. Of course, the British Army lowers their guns, they open up, the smoke piles up. The colonists, when the smoke clears, they take off running, but there's 8 dead. So, ladies and gentlemen, from the point of view of the Massachusetts, Lexington is the first casualties of the American Revolution. 8 Massachusetts lie dead or dying. There are no British casualties. At this point, we will conclude what Griffin asked. The British then march into Lexington. They begin to search the town. Adams and Hancock are gone. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you look from the point of view of a military objective, the British failed. Adams and Hancock, because of Paul Revere, because of the small delay by the Minutemen, are given enough time to basically escape into the backcountry and are not captured. The British basically reform. They march another 8-10 miles down the road to the town of Concord. Guess what? The British arrive at the small, sleepy town, and there's no one there. There's no militia. There's no soldiers. Apparently, of course, the British believe that the colonists have learned their lesson. The British march right inside. The British go into the town. They go. The doors of the army have been smashed open. The British go inside, and the guns are gone. The British will then spend the next several hours. They go house to house. Addicts, they're trying to find where did the weapons go. They must have been in town. Ladies and gentlemen, the British will spend several hours walking around town, breaking into houses. And for those of you who don't get it, how do the colonists fight? Guerrillas, but what? What is the military base of the colonists? Minutemen, which are militias, right? Where do militias come from? They're volunteers, they're citizens. Is there a group of 1,000 of them sitting and waiting somewhere? Ladies and gentlemen, what is the single most important thing to create a militia? You need to have time to notify them, and you need time for them to gather. Ladies and gentlemen, as the British are in the town looking for the weapons, militias from the neighboring towns begin to gather outside of Concord. Folks, Lexington, you should identify, that is called the shot heard around the world. That is the first time a colony goes armed revolt against the mother. Thank you very much. I just didn't say it. I was going too quick. The shot that we mentioned, that first one that we don't know who did it, is nicknamed the shot heard around the world. The shot heard around the world absolutely is Lexington. Now, folks, here's where it gets far more Interesting. The British do not find the guns, but more importantly, the British then leave town. In technical terms, the town of Concord, if you're heading back to Boston, there's a bridge. It's called North Bridge. The British basically line up, they begin to head out of town. As they start crossing the bridge, for those last several hours, colonists from all around the area have gathered in the trees, they've gathered behind fences, and as the British begin to march out of town, the colonists open fire. It is at Concord that we begin to get a much different rebellion. At Concord, you have British soldiers killed. At Concord, the colonists are fighting back. At Lexington, it was simply the British enforcing the law. 8 colonists were killed. At Concord, the colonists are the ones who are going to inflict the damage. And what happens? They fight outside of Concord for 20 minutes. The colonists then disappear. The British form into their rows. The British march down the road. A mile down the road, the colonists have reorganized. They attack again. Please understand, the colonists, the militia, have learned from the natives. They will use guerrilla tactics. They will use hit and run. They will use sniper. Remember, oftentimes if a colonist owned a rifle or a gun, they used it for what? Can you use a musket for hunting squirrels? No. No, because it's not accurate. The advantage of a rifle is their finger inside, you feel the grooving. Rifles are designed to be accurate. What does that mean? I can hide all by myself and I wait and you just shoot into the center of the British line. So how does this matter? Well, the British begin to get far enough behind that General Gage has to send 1,500 soldiers to bring them back. Remember, it's about a 16-mile journey from Concord. I would argue that what I'm about to tell you might be the single most important event of the period. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand when it comes to numbers, they seem so small. Please, try to know the next one. The number itself isn't the number. You have to try to identify why this moment will completely change everything. At the end of April 19, 1775, after the battles of Lexington and Concord, 273 British soldiers, redcoats, the best trained, best equipped, most respected army in the world, are dead. 273. Please notice is an exact number. They are an army. These men all have documentation. For the colony, the number simply is listed as under 100. We don't even know exactly the names of them. We don't know exactly how many were shot, because remember, they're volunteers. Some men who might have got shot in the arm might have just gone home and tended their own wounds. Folks, I understand in the course of the year there's going to be a lot of battles and fights. What is the big deal of what just happened on April 19, 1775?
Little rebellion beat the British.
Who beat the British?
The Minutemen that weren't trained
What
or
Minutemen?
anything. The colonists.
What colonists? Ladies and gentlemen, on April 19, 1775, Massachusetts stood up to the most powerful nation on earth, and for one day they won. Can anyone tell me what is going to be the importance, the significance, and the message of this event? Why does Lexington and Concord matter? Are the English going to take this as a serious threat? Do the English look at this as a big deal? Heck no! It's 273. To the English, is that a big loss? Then where do we need to focus? Who is going to focus on this? Ladies and gentlemen, nobody would even talk about the word independence because it's impossible. You can't win. And now, what does Massachusetts have in her pocket? We won. We stood by our... You did not help us, and we won. Massachusetts is going to use this to tell the other ones, what if? We could have a country of our own. We could create a government that the world has not seen since the fall of Rome. Please understand. Lexington and Concord matters for the simple, undeniable reason. And as much as you may think it sounds stupid and dumb, it is hope. Lexington and Concord treated hope. And let's be honest, for those of you who don't get it, why on earth in our movies and in sports does America love underdogs? We were the greatest underdog of all time. The very beginning creation of this class is a Cinderella story. There's no way they beat England. No way. The point of Lexington and Concord is Massachusetts begins to say, we can win. And now they have something to tell the other counties, look at what can happen. You're fighting for a purpose, you're fighting for a dream, you're fighting for something. The next item, sense, right? Massachusetts needs to convince everybody. In order to convince everybody, everybody needs to get together. Second Continental Congress. If you want to be accurate, it'll be May 10th, 1775. Technically, two events begin simultaneously. One is the Second Continental Congress. The Second Continental Congress will basically take place now until the Articles of Confederation is written. So the Second Continental Congress will meet from May 10, 1775 until somewhere in 1777. At that time, it will be replaced by the Congress, the Articles of Confederation. Second Continental Congress's first order of business will be, they agree that just in case, that they should begin to form a Continental Army. Please understand the counties have not agreed to use it, but they have agreed that to create an army for common defense would simply be a justifiable idea. So ladies and gentlemen, the first original action of the Second Continental Congress is they vote to raise an army. Counties will then basically raise, so each county raises taxes and they send money to the Congress and we will begin to form an army. George Washington will be selected to be the commander of the Continental Army. So George Washington was one of the delegates. He will not be one of the original leaders, politicians. He is sent to command the army. Other men will be the ones in charge of forming the government. So as the Congress agrees to form an army, what is still the number one topic? What is still the number one discussion at the Congress? Massachusetts is trying to emphasize we need help, and what is still going to be the belief of the other counties. Ladies and gentlemen, the other counties are still looking for a way to support Massachusetts without getting themselves in harm's way. The other counties still are not convinced that A, mother can be beaten, and B, is this a wise decision? Folks, there is absolutely no sense to fight a battle that cannot be won. It may be noble, it may be dramatic, but if you are simply going to put yourself into a situation where you will die with no hope of victory, nobility only goes so far. May 10th, there's a second event. Please write down Fort Ticonderoga. Right there is Fort Ticonderoga, and if you're like, what's right there? Ladies and gentlemen, you absolutely positively are going to need to know this. Right here, if you look at my finger, this is the Hudson River. The Hudson River basically goes right up kind of the side of New York. It kind of divides New York from the rest of New England. At the top of the Hudson River, so basically from Hudson River, and if you look straight above it is Montreal. There is Lake Champlain. So notice, you have Montreal, Lake Champlain. At the bottom of Lake Champlain in the Hudson is Fort Ticonderoga. Bless you. Fort Ticonderoga was once a prestigious fort in the English defenses. Fort Ticonderoga was once supposed to defend New York from a French invasion from Montreal. Does everybody understand this? In the last 20 years, is there much threat of an invasion from Montreal? Why? Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to Fort Ticonderoga. Two gentlemen decide to lead advances on Fort Ticonderoga. They are Benedict Arnold, the very kind of organized militiaman, and a gentleman named Ethan Allen. Benedict Arnold is going to be more of, kind of a soldier wannabe. He's going to, run his army more like an army. I mean, it's a militia, but he has rules and order. Ethan Allen runs a group called the Green Mountain Boys. In fact, there's an old movie based on them. The Green Mountain Boys are out of New Hampshire. They are fur traders. They are trappers. They are woodsmen. The Green Mountain Boys are called Green Mountain Boys because they almost all have either these green jackets. These were men who are kind of very rough around the edges. These were men who kind of lived off in the frontier. The two groups are very different. The two groups both head towards Ticonderoga, and eventually they kind of run into each other and they decide that they will work together. The problem is neither one of the commanders wants to give up authority to the other. So what happens is the two of them attack together. Benedict Arnold leads his men. Ethan Allen leads his men. At this point, I'm not exactly sure what's the best way to do this. On May 10, 1775, Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold attack Fort Ticonderoga. There are two completely different ways I can do it. One, I can tell you that Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold successfully capture the fort. Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold defeat the British Army once again. The British Army at Fort Ticonderoga has been captured. Imagine all across the 13 colonies, stories hit the newspaper. British Fort falls. Ticonderoga in the hands of the Continental Army. On a very important note, even though Fort Ticonderoga, we're going to find out, is a little bit of an enigma, Fort Ticonderoga is fully loaded. The armaments, the cannons, the artillery of Fort Ticonderoga will become the artillery of George Washington's Continental Army. Fort Ticonderoga, which remember was once a very prestigious, vital fort, it was fully armed. Remember I said I can tell you this in two ways. For those of you who are having trouble, what is the single biggest thing about Ticonderoga? You could argue artillery or propaganda. For those of you who do not think propaganda is important, you might want to study the 19th. Some small little Austrian dude will take the world to the brink of destruction. Ladies and gentlemen, Adolf Hitler showed the world that if you convince people of something and you create an enormous, elaborate story and ruse, you can become extremely dangerous. What is the propaganda? For the second time, people who read the newspaper in America believe what? We beat the British. The British Army is not invincible. Now, what is the more accurate story, and this is how England portrays it? Folks, when Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold attacked Fort Ticonderoga, the front gates were open. The fort only had a skeleton crew. The soldiers at Fort Ticonderoga were literally sleeping in their bed. It was much more like a custodial crew. The soldiers in Ticonderoga were either very old, some of them were men who had lost their legs, they were soldiers but they had been wounded in battle, and basically the British did not expect this fort to have any real significance. It was in the middle of nowhere. So you have one of those situations. The British could say simply made a mistake, they did not take the cannons out, the fort was not well defended, but there was no battle. I mean, the colonists didn't beat anybody, they simply captured an unarmed fort. Let's be honest. When it appears in the colonial newspapers, we don't say the front gates were open. We don't say that the soldiers were, elderly and disabled. You simply say British fort falls, and what do people do? They make their own conclusion in their brain. Despite Ticonderoga, the Second Continental Congress still cannot agree. And folks, the biggest agreement is Massachusetts wants more of direct support. The other colonies are much more, why don't we negotiate? Why don't we try to work out a deal? Why can't we compromise? And ladies and gentlemen, that will bring us to kind of that final event. June 16th, 1770. Folks, June 16th will be the Battle of Bunker Hill. That is what we'll do tomorrow.